to Room 237, and I'm back with another more recent horror film. Only this one is not from A24. Lately, I've been going through and watching all the horror films from A24 because they are my favorite production company for newer horror films. Just everything I look for in modern horror, A24 has it covered. They do what I think is the best of horror films of the last at least 12 years. Actually, I remember the exact, I think 2012 was when they came to be, but ever since their conception, that was, I think, they've been putting out the best horror. And I've also been checking out films similar, like ones that feel or look like A24 films, but are not. And this is one. But this is one from probably my second favorite company as far as modern, more recent horror. And that is IFC, or IFC Midnight. I think they put out some great stuff as well. Yeah, maybe I like more art housey stuff, at least as far as newer stuff goes. But I thought this was a very good film. And so yeah, this is IFC Midnight, not A24. And it's 2019's The Other Lamb. Not to be confused with Lamb, which is an A24 film that came out last year, which I really want to see. But I think they can both be put in like the same genre, sort of folk horror, only this one's more of a cult film. And real quick, I have seen some reviews for this, and some people are convinced this is not a horror film. Some people are calling it like a drama, or a dark drama, or a drama with some horror overtones, or a drama with some horror moments and elements. But they swear it's not a horror film, and a horror movie doesn't have to be, non-stop horror start to finish. You can have a slow burn, more dramatic type movie that's a build-up, but have all these psychological horror elements. And basically, this movie is a coming-of-age story, which A24 does do a lot of. Again, this is not A24. I got to get in the habit of just saying it. This isn't A24, but this is a coming-of-age story, and it's told both literally and as a metaphor. But this is a horror film. This is a cult horror film. Yeah, it might not be as straightforward as, say, The Wicker Man or even Midsummer. And I will say, I liked this way more than Midsummer. Which Midsummer had a metaphor it was trying to tell through a cult story. I thought this was done way better than that. But yes, this is a horror film. It's a little slower. It might have more emphasis on the drama, sure, but it's still a horror film. Like, a movie doesn't have... Like, I even heard some review where someone say it's not even a horror movie up until the end. I was like, why? Because that's where the blood is, or that's where the violence is. You don't have to have that all the way through to be a horror movie. But even so, I thought this was a very, very good movie. And I can see why some people wouldn't like it, or why some people wouldn't consider it horror, because it is a very slow burn. It is more atmosphere. It is more, there's a lot of ambiguity. It's very vague. It leaves a lot to the imagination, which I appreciate. If this movie were to spoon feed everything, I think it would have lost a lot of its impact. But it was directed by Malgorzata Zumowska, if I pronounce that correctly, which she is a Polish filmmaker who has also done... what else has she done? Never Gonna Snow Again. which was selected for Best International Film at the Oscars. Happy Man, Stranger, Father, 33 Scenes from Life, Els, In the Name of... Haven't heard of any of these. All right. And written by C.S. McMullen, and it stars Raffi Cassidy, whom I have seen recently in The Killing of a Sacred Deer. She was Colin Farrell's daughter. She did a great job in that. I was a very big fan of that film. And she does a great job in this as well. Michael Huisman, if I pronounce that correctly. He's known for Game of Thrones, Haunting of Hill House, Orphan Black. Been in some stuff. And Denise Go. Those are pretty much the three main characters. And what I really like about this film is also the cinematography was done by Michael Englert, and the music, Powell Mikeaton, if I pronounce that correctly. This is I think it's I'm trying to see which country this was. It's a co-production between the U.S., Ireland, and Belgium. So that's why some of these names are kind of hard to pronounce. The performances, the cinematography, and the music are the biggest aspects of this film, at least for me. Those were my favorites. Those were the things I think worked the best. It reeks of atmosphere. It's a very limited film as far as its setting and its cast. You really have this group of people. I think there's maybe 20 people altogether. I'm not quite sure how many women there were amongst the wives and the sisters. And then the shepherd, who the leader of the cult, and that's pretty much it. They're in this one location, then they have to migrate. They're forced to leave, and they go on this on-foot trek to this new paradise. And that's pretty much the bulk of the film. And it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere of the Irish woods. I'm not sure if that's where it takes place, but that's where it was filmed. And it's so rich in atmosphere, and I love the music. It just has this very dark, ominous tone pretty much throughout the whole film. And really the story is both the literal and the metaphorical coming-of-age story of, what was his name? Sella, I think that was the character's name, played by Raffi Cassidy. Sella, yeah. She's a girl who was born into this cult. You have the one shepherd who is... It's not really shown or expressed what his intentions are. Like, if he truly believes he's this shepherd, or if, he's just a nefarious, eccentric cult leader. Because it is hinted that the wives, because the women are split up into two groups. You have his wives who wear red, the red robes. They're the older ones who are kind of like the founding members, or the ones that were recruited first. And then you have the sisters who are younger. They wear blue, and they're all daughters of the wives. And I think it is expressed that all the wives were once broken, lost women that were found by the shepherd. So it does sound like someone who was eccentric and, was really able to appeal to these women and kind of pull them in for whatever reason. And whether he truly believes in what he is or not, there are some things that lead to maybe he's in it for the sexual aspect, like one of those cult leaders that just uses his power and dominance. One, for the sake of power and dominance, but also, so he can have this sort of sexual relationship, and I can't remember the word for it, polyamorous, I guess, because he has all these wives, has bared children with all of them. And he is this handsome, long-haired, bearded Jesus looking guy. But the main story is Sella, played by Cassidy, the literal and metaphorical coming of age. She's, where she gets her first period, she's becoming a woman, and at the same time, she's starting to question and doubt her faith in the shepherd. And of course, periods are seen as impure. They have to be given the grace which only the shepherd can give whenever they're impure. They have to wear their hair in braids. They're not allowed to tell stories. Only the shepherd can tell stories. It is this very strict kind of world that they live in. And so periods is seen as impure. And he must know when they all hit their period or when they're on their period so that he can grace them. And I do like how they do this. Being touched by his grace is never seen. We don't know if it's just him having sex with them. The bit we do get does seem like it ranges from sex to assault, but we never get to see it. So if it is more ritualistic than that, we don't get to see it, and that's one of the many ambiguities of this film. Sella was born into this cult. Her mother died during childbirth. And so she often asked the shepherd stories about her mother, and Sella appears to be the figure of the shepherd's attention. He, like the favorite of his sisters, or potentially when we get up to the ending, the whole reason for why the ending happens, which I'll get to when I talk about that. But he really has a thing for Sella. And really, the whole movie is just, like, in the beginning, we just sort of see how they live in this little cabin, this sort of camp way out in the woods. Then they're told that they have to leave, which we as an audience see it as a police officer, because they look like they're in Puritan times, but it takes place in modern day. So like a police car shows up at night, tells them for whatever reason, hey, you have to leave this area. And Sella sees and overhears this, but of course he tells his flock that, it's for whatever kind of religious reasons. It doesn't tell them it's as literal as it is. But also, Sella gets her period when she's on duty taking care of the goats, or the lambs. They have a flock of lambs way out that they each kind of take turns watching or helping. And there is some... also the editing, that's where a lot of like the horror aspects come in, because Sella does experience these visions in the way it's edited. Like we see continuous cuts of her underwater, like leafy water in a white gown with other women in white gowns around her. And just some horrific imagery, like she sees, I think it's like a hummingbird with maggots all in it. One lamb has given birth, like a stillbirth, to a skinless lamb, which is still moving. And then there's some things that, I don't know if they're premonitions to her, or it is just showing us what's going to happen so we can So we get a picture of what's happening, or like if it's just what she's imagining. But like little snippets of her like stabbing the fetus or whatever. But this is when she gets her period, and one of the biggest shots of the film is when she realizes she has her period and she just screams into the hills, which is one of my favorite shots. But right before she does that, it shows a shot from behind her just to show how vast and empty this, you know, the hillside is, how open and empty it is. And then it shows her face as she screams, but there's no audio, or it's very muffled. And you can really just feel just the open space, and the like I said, the atmosphere is very rich in this film, very atmospheric. So slowly during this journey, a few moments happen where the true shepherd, we find out his name is Michael, because the one wife that's always in trouble calls him out at one point and addresses him as Michael in front of everyone. And you know, there's one moment where there's a wife who's pregnant, and just the physicality of the journey, mixed with probably because it was her time, you know, gives birth during the trek and dies in childbirth. And he's very cold about it, and he wants to leave the baby there because it's not born right. It's not born as planned, and therefore an abomination. And they even have a funeral pyre for the wife, who has another daughter there. She's probably between 3 and 5. She keeps trying to climb up on it to see her mother, and he's yelling at her and he's dragging her away from it. And yeah, he opts to leave the baby there. And that's when the one wife calls him out, saying it's his fault. And calls him Michael. And then this is when she tells Sella that she's leaving the cult and she's taking the baby with her. And I think with some imagery, she's supposed to represent the good of the film, but also the freedom of, I guess, becoming a woman. Because there's a story that she tells later on that kind of is about her. But she leaves with the baby. And then there's another scene when they're all kind of taking a break, all wondering how much longer it's going to take. And this one sister just happens to say, I think I see something down there. And the shepherd is like, well, do you want to lead us? Do you want to take us there? She's like, no, I was just saying. He keeps telling her to walk, and he just starts kicking the shit out of her, telling her to walk, you know, lead us, walk. And he like slaps her around a little bit, and he just drags her across the ground as she's screaming. And then he just tells her that, like, you know, it says she's pathetic, there's no way she could be his. And in the same breath, he just stands up and looks at everyone and says, you must have faith. Like, he goes from those two extremes, and it helps show, one, how unhinged, maybe not unhinged, but just how psychotic he is with this religion and his position. And each time something like this happens, we see Sella's reaction, and yeah, we can really see she's not having it. And then, well, shortly after he does that, they come across this cliff that overlooks this valley with, you know, with the lake and everything. And he calls it Eden. This is their new Eden. He says, you know, your faith in me has brought this to us. And that night, she's beckoned to his tent where he essentially assaults her. Now, we can call it assault because that's what it is. But I guess this is just the way the cult is run. And he has a thing for sticking 2 fingers in their mouth so that they can't scream. But he assaults her, and the way it shows how because there's a lot of edits and cuts to help show what's going through her mind. And yeah, apart from the atmosphere and the tension and the cinematography, the other big aspect would be the acting, which all the acting is very solid. The lead, Raffi Cassidy, does do a great job as playing this woman or this young girl becoming a woman, doesn't really know what's going on with herself, and then we pretty much see her learn and figure out her entire world is, not really a lie, but bullshit. Not right. And the shepherd, played by Michael, what was it? Hussman. One thing they did do that I appreciated with this character that I think helped work is he's very enigmatic. He doesn't have a whole lot of lines, but he ranges from being this very Christ-like character, talking about you must have faith. Have faith, and I will take you into my grace. And he goes from that to little outbursts of him being very abusive towards these women. And it doesn't get into, at least in a whole lot of detail, how he came to be or why these women found him so appealing. It does say that, the wives, when he first started this cult, were broken somehow. They had bad relationships, bad home lives, or whatever. So they found him very appealing, and that they loved his attention. One that they call the cursed wife, the one that's always in penance, paying for her sins that they don't always go into, but she does at one point say she's being punished for her vanity. She does say at one point that, his attention and the love he gave, she compared it to the sun. So I guess he just found these broken women. It was very appealing to them, but it doesn't go into it in a lot of detail. It's just enough, which I appreciated. We didn't need to be spoon-fed everything. And the fact that he does have so little lines, and we don't know a whole lot about him, except for his name. We do hear his name at one point. Does help make it more effective. He is more presence than anything, which in a character like this, I think helps. And so that after a couple little outbursts that we get of this rage and abuse, that later scenes, all he has to do is just walk on screen or just say Sella's name and beckon her. It creates dread, and I think that worked. And so yeah, the bulk of the film is at the end of the first act. They're told they have to leave. He's told they have to leave. He passes it off as this a religious act, and it's this on-foot trek to find this new home. And that's really when Sella starts to, everything unfolds for her. And at first, like anyone who's kind of born into this way of life, she's kind of in denial of it. Like, she's talking to the one wife that's always punished, and because uh, Stella's in the tent one morning and she's looking at how she's bleeding. The other sisters see, they tell the shepherd, so she has to like spend her impure bleeding time away from everyone else with the one wife that's always punished. And they have this scene where they're talking, and she starts telling her how everything's kind of bullshit. And she doesn't quite believe her at first, but there's several key moments that I don't really want to spoil, because this movie is all about build-up. The whole point of the movie is it's very methodical pacing and build-up to, the third act and everything that happens there. So I don't really want to say what the key moments are that Sella sees the shepherd do that kind of undoes everything for her. So I guess I'll leave it at that, and I'll get into spoilers. But yeah, this movie is definitely not for everyone. It definitely is a slow burn. I guess I can see why people might think it's just a drama with some horror elements, but like I said before, just because it's not loaded with jump scares or have a killer or a monster or anything doesn't mean it's not a horror movie. It has its horror elements placed very strategically, and it's very well thought out, and it is effective. The ending is still a little confusing for me. I'm not sure how much of it is ambiguous and left up to interpretation, but some parts are still kind of confusing. But I thought this movie is very well made. It is beautifully shot, looks great, very well acted, and very rich in atmosphere, and just the way the landscapes are shot, and you really feel just the isolation and the middle of nowhere feeling that this film has. So, but if you like more artsy horror films like A24 or IFC, definitely check it out. Or if you like movies about cults, I thought this was more effective than Midsummer. I liked this a lot more than Midsummer. And it does kind of have the same feeling of Midsummer. You could put them in the same category, but I happen to think this one was way better. So, yeah, with that, I'm going to get into spoilers. So, like, after he assaults her, it shows the image of her when she first saw her period blood and then screaming. And then there's the image of her standing in front of the fire, and I thought that image was kind of silly looking, but I get what they were trying to do. Where at this point she's a woman and she's ready to roar. And she tells the other sisters a story about this woman who, essentially freed herself, and she's out in the woods, and everything makes her feel free. Pretty much telling the story of that one wife that left with the baby, because she said at night when everyone was sleeping, she would disrobe and just stand naked in the woods because she'd feel free. Also, at this point, her braids are down because he makes them all wear braids. I'm guessing that's like a symbol of like the hold or the restriction of of the cult, and like breaking free of their ties. But the next morning, because also that night the wives are talking about how they're going to be reborn in the morning, which when the sisters wake up, the wives are gone, and they go down to the waterfront beach, I guess, and there's all the red robes and just Shepherd. And he says that, you know, they've been reborn. They are now one with the land. He drowned them. And which is the image that we see of, like when we see Sella underwater, and we see all the other women in white underwater. That was the image. Because also when they first get to Eden, he rebaptizes all of them, and he holds Sella under a little too long. So they're all pretty much found out he killed all their mothers. And then says, so now you can be my wives. So, which I think they're his daughters anyway, because I think they were all born into the cult. And I think he fathered all of them. So he's saying, you know, this is the next step for us. You can all be my wives. And, you know, probably adding more to how he uses dominance and fear and religion to get what he wants from these women, which is sex. And I mean, even earlier in the film, we see at dinner, he just picks a wife, and that's who he's gonna have sex with that night, and why he must know who's menstruating. So he calls Sella over to say, let me take you my grace. She says, you're not our shepherd, and I don't want your grace. He responds with a slap, and she responds with a slap, and we cut to black. But just prior to that scene, like after she tells this story to the sisters, we get this no audio kind of slow motion scene, this visual of all the sisters attacking Shepherd, and even Sella like biting a chunk out of his neck or face and spitting the chunk out. All the sisters holding him and attacking him, which I'm guessing did happen. We just don't see it as that. We see it in that slow motion snippet of kind of foreshadowing, which I thought was effective as well. And then this is where I kind of get lost, because we see the police pull up. There's like a marsh where all these white gowned women are washed up, and they're kind of following the trail through the woods, and they come across Shepherd, who's bloody, dead. He's kind of strung up between two trees with ram horns on his head, which could symbolize a number of things, because there is the whole saying of one ram per flock, meaning him, but also the fact that, you know, they're revealing the true devil inside. But it shows that this is all near the original compound in the beginning of the film. So it's like, did they carry all the bodies back and set that up? Or was the whole movie in Sella's head? Because it does show that she's having kind of a hard time with reality. Like, she doesn't just question her cult and religion, but also her reality. So it's like, did the whole movie really happen? And did she like lead this revolt from the beginning? Because then it ends with her standing with all the women by the waterfall. It's like, did she lead them to the... That's where it kind of loses me. I don't lose the entire film on it, but it's one part that kind of confuses me. Like, so did they bring all the bodies back? Was it really not that far? You just kind of led them on this very indirect route to make it feel long. I don't know. But that's the movie. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. Again, beautifully shot, very well acted. It was very effective in how minimal everything was, as far as, you know, all the horror scenes, all the disturbing elements, whether it's shown indirectly or very minimal or stylized and at a place like foreshadowing, I thought it was very effective. I thought it was effective to not really explain what this cult, how it started, what it was all about, what the shepherd's appeal is, how he pulled them in, other than the fact that they were broken women and he appealed to them. I think that the mystique helped build dread later on in the film, especially to give him those little outbursts. So then all he has to do is be on screen, and there's this sense of dread. And I also thought that the metaphor worked. The metaphor for, the literal and the metaphorical story of, coming of age, becoming a woman. I thought the metaphor worked way more than in Midsummer. But yeah, I really enjoyed this film. And I can see why it's not for everybody, but I love slow burn, slow paced, more artsy horror films like this anyway, especially newer, more modern ones. So yeah, I can say I really enjoyed 2019's The Other Lamb. So yeah, that's my review for The Other Lamb, and thank you for watching.